Welcome to Psych Sessions at Work, where we talk about jobs with the people who study jobs. I'm your host, Janet Peters. Each episode in this series features work psychologists that share what it means to be an industrial organizational psychologist, the type of work they do, and reflections from their own career paths. I'm excited to share these insights with you, so let's get to work. Hello, welcome to Psych Sessions at Work. On this episode, we have Dr. Clemente Diaz with us. Hi, Clemente. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Janet. How's everything going? Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so I have to tell you, I'm very excited to have you on the show today because, probably unbeknownst to you, I have been following the work that you've been doing for quite a while because I see you pop up on my social media on, the different teaching things because you are someone who really advocates for IO psychology sort of throughout the undergraduate curriculum and an intro. And so I've cited you many times. I have followed your social media many times. I've used many of the resources you post. And so I'm just elated to have you on the show and to chat with you.
Thank you again. Praise, I guess, right?
Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about what you do and what your position is and your role as an IO psychologist?
So my primary role is in higher education administration. So I'm the associate director of the College Now program at Baruch College. So that's basically a dual enrollment program. We have high school students who enroll in college credit courses while they're in high school. So it's about just preparing them to, the college experience, academically speaking, career-wise, and just getting them exposed as early as possible. In addition to that, I teach IO Psych courses at the CUNY School of Professional Studies in their graduate program. And I'm part of various committees. So right now I'm the chair of the Bridge Builders Committee for PSYOP. And that committee is solely responsible for, or not solely, its mission is to educate students and educators to the field of IO psychology. And then the third thing I chair, or the next thing I do, is chairing something called the CUNY IO Practitioners Network. So it's a group of administrators within the City University of New York who either have IO backgrounds or are interested in applying IO to their day-to-day work. So that kind of is in a nutshell all the things that I do on my day-to-day work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going to ask you about that Bridge Builders program. So but before we get into that, what I want to ask you is, sort of knowing that many undergraduate students potentially in intro would be listening to this. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what does IO psychology mean to you? So when you tell people like, oh yeah, my degree in IO psychology, and they look at you and they don't know what that means, what's your elevator speech about IO psychology?
To me, IO psychology is really an opportunity to make the workplace better, whether it's for employees or employers alike, through using science, data, evidence-based practices to make sure that the workplace is as productive, as effective, as fun as possible. And I say that because one doesn't have to have a background in IO to reap the benefits of what IO psychologists do. Right, whether it's going through an interview process and having that process be seamless, not seem like you're being bamboozled, by the interviewer with strange questions that chances are don't even have any relevance to the position that you're applying for. Right, something that kind of makes that process seem as engaging as possible. So that's just one example. And I say that again because we all work, regardless of what our chosen professions are, regardless of our academic experiences, we're all going to work for the vast majority of our lives, right? So again, it's that opportunity of just making, that time in the workplace as good as possible.
Yeah, you were talking about, selection and all that. I'm wondering if you saw recently I saw it on social media that some hiring organization was asking potential employees, right, in these interviews, what their favorite, I think it was like Marvel or who their favorite Marvel superhero was.
If it's not that, it's your favorite animal, your favorite color.
Yeah. I was like, I don't know. I don't know what company or organization did that, but I was like, they need an IO psychologist.
Definitely not approved by IO psychologists.
For sure. So then if that's what IO psychology means to you, do you want to share a little bit about, so one of the things, the bridge building program, that's what I'm curious about. If you want to share a little bit more about what they do, but what I want to talk about is the need for it, because I think this is how our paths have crossed, is recognizing this need for earlier on in the psychology curriculum to talk about IO psychology and how it's, you don't really see it in intro textbooks, and how it's often sort of at the end or maybe not present at all. And so I'm just curious if you want to talk about that a little bit, and then go into sort of the Bridges program and some of the work that you do for that.
Yeah, definitely. So Bridge Builders is one of many initiatives that PSYOP has to basically just get the word out. So for example, there's the JIT PSYOP task force, which primarily focuses on getting IO represented in textbooks. But then the Bridge Builders Committee it's a group of, I want to say maybe 10 different IO professionals. And we work together to try and get the word out to students and educators primarily.
Yeah.
Whether it's through social media, doing different campaigns, compiling information that we share with educators and students, through different groups such as the Society for Teaching Psychology, the Management and Organizational Behavior Teaching Society, and then student-focused kind of initiatives. Something that we started this past spring was organizing quarterly talks, where we have one of our members or invited guests talk about what it is that they do in IO psychology, and kind of talk about careers in IO psychology, the graduate school process. And really that's to just engage students more.
So one thing I want to think, I can't remember if you mentioned this or not. I did hear you mention PSYOP though.
Yes.
And so I just, PSYOP, for those of you who might not be familiar, is the Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychology. It's sort of our body that, you can tell, like, provides these resources. There are sort of governing body, and there's, how else would you describe PSYOP, Clemente?
I would say PSYOP is the premier organization for psychologists, right? They're the
Yes.
body for IO psychology. I think that's the best way to categorize them. There are definitely several local groups that do great things. But PSYOP is kind of that national organization that sets the standards. They set kind of the vision of what the field should be doing going forward.
Yeah, they have that scale.
Yeah.
I remember when I stumbled upon PSYOP, being an undergrad and trying to learn more about IO psychology, they were just such a rich resource for information. I remember, graduate school, what's the process of doing this if I want to go to graduate school for IO psychology? And they have a bunch of resources for undergraduates and ways to get involved. And and then once you are an IO psychologist, governing body, and a great organization for IO psychologists at that, like you say, that national level. Can you I have what is potentially a tough question for you, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Okay. Why do you think IO psychology is often left out from intro? Or why is it sort of an addendum? Where does that come from? Why do you think that is?
Funny enough, I don't think it's a hard question.
Oh, okay. Well, then here's a softball.
I say that because this was back in 2018. I actually surveyed introductory psychology professors to answer that question. And the three things that I found through the survey data was, one, it's not in the textbook, so that's why I don't teach it, or it's not in the curriculum provided by the institution. Two, I don't know much about it, so don't feel confident teaching about it. And then three, don't know about what resources I should be using to incorporate this material.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that it's not in the intro to psych textbooks is because of just this mindset of, it's not that important of a field. Even when I've spoken to publishers, it's like, IO psychology is gaining more relevance now. My response is, but we've always worked since the dawn of time. So I'm like, what do you mean the relevance now? So it's this misconception of, well, psychology, and I think that this is a misconception a lot of students have as well, is psychology is counseling, therapy, kind of, those are the primary focuses, right? So we talk about, emotions in the work, in intro to psych. We talk about personalities. We talk about disorders, stress, and things like that. And to me, I usually think, well, all those things are related to IO psych.
Yeah.
Right? There's mental health issues and stress in the workplace, emotions, and how do you regulate your emotions when you're dealing with your colleagues or other individuals in your organization? I think it's just, that's a big reason. And then, the antiquated name doesn't help, right? Industrial and organizational psychology. It's a mouthful. It's multisyllabic. You hear it, you're like, industrial? What do you mean? Like, this is not the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
When you compare it to other countries where, in the United Kingdom, it's work psychology, or other places have work and organizational psychology. Think business psychology. Not saying that I'm leaning towards one or the other, but there's names that you hear it and you're like, okay, this makes sense. So the name doesn't necessarily help. But again, it's that mindset of that there's more important topics to cover in intro to psych. And with the plethora of material that needs to be covered, it's easy to just say, well, I as an instructor don't think this is as important. Or it could just be, this is not my forte. So it's easy to just push it aside.
Yeah. I know I have you as a guest on the show. I know that I'm preaching to the choir, but I think that's such a shame. I think it's such an overlooked, missed opportunity. Mm-hmm. These students are going to graduate. And honestly, even if they're not psych majors, they're going to go graduate and ideally get a job, and they're going to enter the workforce, and the majority of which are going to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year.
Yeah.
Or they graduate when they're, let's say 22 to 25-ish. Like, that's 40 years of work. I mean,
it's like 1/3 of your whole life at work.
Yeah. To give them some insight and some skills and some knowledge to navigate that process better. I mean, what better use of applying psychology than that of this thing that's again, psych major or not, they're going to spend most students are going to spend a large amount of their time at work or adjacent to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yes, I'm with you. I'm the big proponent. So, okay, let's say that you are given, I don't know, some sort of magic wand, and you get to rule the world, and you get to say what parts of IO psychology get covered in intro. What do you put in there? If you were thinking about, I don't know, the teacher who says, I don't know what to do or what to include, what unit or what topic of IO psych do you think would be a good fit for intro?
Yeah, I think that's a little hard to say, because I'm always an advocate of, let me survey the students and see what's most relevant to them.
Oh, but that's a great response though, right?
A needs assessment, right?
Yeah. That's like the perfect IO response.
And I think it's important because I can intuitively say, well, why not selections, right? Everyone, you'll go on an interview eventually, or performance. You have to perform in the workplace. You have to engage in teams, most likely. You have to work with others. But depending on the institution you're at, if it's not a full chapter that you're integrating into your course, it would probably be fruitful just to ask students, hey, you're all going to get jobs after you graduate high school. The data says, most students attend college because they want to get a career, right? Regardless of what us academics think, right? It's not purely some, for academic, to become intellectuals. They want jobs. Mm-hmm. So what would be most useful with the work context in mind? And base it off that. The great thing is that, again, since IO psychology is so interdisciplinary, focused on different aspects, it can be easily incorporated into virtually any chapter.
Yeah.
Again, whether it's mental health, stress, emotions, personality, you name it, we can find a way of integrating IO psychology into it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really mean for it to be a trick question. Apparently it came did because I realized my answer is I couldn't have answered that question because I'm a little bit of a sprinkler. I like to sprinkle IO psychology through the course because I think it's important to show how a lot of these theories and our knowledge about human behavior shows up at work. You know, it doesn't, whether that's like incorporating it into motivation or like you say, or stress. I feel stressed by my job sometimes. I know a lot of people do. And talking about stress in that context and coping strategies, right? So I'm not a here's the unit on IO. Look, IO is everything. It's everything. So I'm a little bit of a sprinkler myself.
And I think that's great. I would just argue that if one would, obviously this is self-serving, right? As an IO psychologist, it's a matter of making it explicit. I want students to understand, like, yes, this is applicable to your life, and this is part of IO psychology.
Yeah.
Remember what it is and advocate for it when they're at their workplace, or if someone comes across, hey, I'm doing this, you know exactly what they're talking about. Again, since the name doesn't really help our case.
I know sometimes, and I don't know, maybe we should keep this between you and me and now the audience, but sometimes if someone's like, oh, what do you do? I say, like, I'm a work psychologist, because it is hard to, the industrial and organizational name, I think it does make it hard for people to transfer their conceptualization of what that means. Like you said, you use the word industrial and people get these connotations of the Industrial Revolution. And honestly, even when I use organizational, people bring,
I think you're organizing stuff.
Yeah. And so
you're Marie Kondo.
Yeah. I wish. But I think saying, oh, you know, work psychology is often, it's a little bit easier for people to conceptualize what that means and what we do and the areas that we work. One of the questions I want to ask you is if you've given your work in IO psychology and even applying it in higher education and taking your knowledge to the institution, right, in the academy, if you have there's a particularly fun or memorable sort of project where you got to use IO psychology or that you've worked on in your job.
So I would say that the most memorable project is through the STEM Research Academy that we have within my department. So that's a very, I don't want to say exclusive, it's a kind of very robust program where we select a very small number of students to go through a 2-semester program. During the spring semester, these high school students, oftentimes 10th and 11th graders, they take a pre-science prep course. And then in the summer, we pair them up with research mentors so they can get the ins and outs of doing research. And my biggest thing was making sure IO psychology was represented in those research mentors. So it took some time, pulling teeth, because faculty and research members are stretched thin, and more often than not, the summer is their time to kind of recompose for the upcoming semester, right? So kind of really advocating for the program and for the need to have IO represented. And this is our 5th year, if I'm not mistaken, that we've had IO psychology represented as a discipline during the summer. So for example, this upcoming summer, we have 9 students specifically who are going to be working with 3 IO psychologists doing research. And at the end of that program, they get to present their findings to the university at large, as well as a science consortium that we're part of. So again, they get exposure to IO psychology very early on. But apart from, again, being self-serving, it's really just getting them exposure to research and kind of the benefits of knowing how to, look at some sort of finding and determining whether it's quality evidence or not, right? Because there's so much information that we get flooded with, whether it's by the media, anywhere. Maybe a little misleading because, hey, their sample size was small, or, those aren't the conclusions that the actual research article or the researchers came to. So really having that critical thinking is ultimately the goal of our program.
Yeah. And I kind of want to add to that. One of the things that I observe is sometimes it's easy to confuse what is current practice with what is best practice. That sometimes people just accept what organizations are doing as best practice, like asking about their favorite Marvel superhero, or questions like you said, animal color, what have you, versus best practice. And I think sometimes it's hard. I've observed this in my own life with my own sort of personal connections, is sometimes when you talk about best practices, that's not necessarily what's happening. And getting people, I mean, I think this is true of any specialty in psychology, is behavior change is the hardest thing, right? It really doesn't matter what specialist you are. If someone has a magical wand that can make people change their behavior, they would be a billionaire, because behavior change is hard. And I think it's the same way in IO psychologists. It's one of our challenges, is whether that's getting people to buy into new practices, whether that's if you're doing organizational change management, is that part's hard. And so having a project like that of getting students to think through what's accepted versus best practice, or what's in the media versus best practice, that's awesome.
And I would take
sounds amazing.
I'll take it one step further, just because I think oftentimes in my workplace, I'm probably seen as a naysayer. I differentiate best practices between evidence-based practices.
Yes.
Especially in higher education, we have a lot of people who are looking at best practices. So, for example, in career services, this is what the other institutions or universities are doing. All right, that's fantastic. It may work for them. It may not work for us, or it may not actually be effective when you look at the data, right? And what the stated goals are. It may look great at the surface level, but is actually providing something of value or having some sort of impact, apart from, again, what we think we see, versus actually looking at the evidence and the data and having that data and the evidence dictate or kind of direct what our actions are going to be. So usually in the workplace, it's like, oh, we should do this because this is what everyone's doing. I'm like, okay, that's great, but let's break it down. Is it actually going to work here, right? Sounds like a great thing, but are we adding any value to kind of what we're doing with students or to our colleagues, or am I just wasting my time?
I love that point, particularly because I think any organization is, I think, vulnerable to this, is doing what's in vogue at the moment, whatever that might be. And it's kind of sort of, like you say, it's characterized under best practices. But the question we really have to ask ourselves is there support to suggest that we're actually impacting the outcome that we want? Like, what is it that we're trying to change? And are we actually doing that? And I think it's easy to be swayed by, like, what you're saying, of what other organizations, what other people, companies, whatever are doing, and to say, oh, look, it worked this way or for them. But that doesn't, we really need to look at the empirical support for it.
Yeah.
I like that. Which is actually going to lead me, we've been kind of sort of dancing around this, or at least I have, is what are some of the challenges you think IO psychologists or IO psychology, you can answer either, what do you think are some of our challenges in our jobs?
Well, I would say the biggest one we've touched upon, which is the name, in terms of recruiting new students to go into the discipline, or even just take a class on the subject. Trying to pitch our services to organizations, whether you're doing it as a consultant or you're just trying to get a job, right? Well, I got a degree in IO psychology. What the heck is that? More often than not, especially within IO psych, grad students tend to lean towards roles in HR. And sometimes, seeing if they if a recruiter compares someone with a degree in HR and IO psychology, they know what HR is. So they may lean towards the applicant a bit more. So, that's definitely a big challenge for the field as a whole. Another challenge I would say is there are too many organizations and individuals within organizations who maintain the status quo, right? So sometimes when we come in, again, whether you're a consultant or you're just working in an organization trying to make some sort of change, it's hard to get change implemented, even if you have the data, you have the evidence, you have the strategies that should be implemented. If people hold dear to kind of their mental structures, their mindsets, it's very hard to change. One example is without saying names, I know an individual who's very big on unconscious bias training. Right. Yeah, they go out, kind of do trainings for different organizations and so forth. And I was like, all right, that's great and all. But the evidence shows unless you're actually doing something actionable, doing that type of training doesn't really accomplish anything, right? Because by at the end of the week, people forgot what they did, or they may remember, but it doesn't be. It's not something actionable that they're going to do. You need strategies. You need to change policies if you guys difference. So we kind of have to look at it holistically. I gave the person evidence. I gave them kind of research articles. They're like, hey, we can have a discussion. Didn't change the person's mind. I still see kind of unconscious bias training everywhere. And I'm usually like, okay, great. But, it's kind of, you have a recipe, but you're missing some ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
Not, the best thing that you're putting out there. So, that's another thing. Just kind of the pushback that we and even other professions just get in general.
Yeah, I think your point, especially like what you're talking about unconscious bias training, is I don't know any human, like complex human problem that's going to be solved in like a 1 or 2 hour training. If you're not scaffolding and incorporating these things that you're talking about, like what you're saying, right? That's where we see some of the benefits and the evidence from, is when you're doing these actionable steps. I think that's really hard. And I think you're right. I think sometimes getting that behavior changes can be quite difficult. I think, in the consulting projects I've done, this is the crux of biopsychology, but humans are often one of the most difficult barriers for a variety of reasons. And I think that is exactly and precisely why our skill set is so important, right? That makes us that much more valuable, because humans are complex. And I think one of the things that we do well is deal with the complexity of human behavior at work. If everyone was the same and reacted the same, we wouldn't have a job. We wouldn't be a field. And so, that definitely is a major piece of it. And as we sort of come up here on time, the sort of one of the last questions I would really love to hear your response on is, as we think about current undergraduates and it not just psych majors, but students who are taking intro and maybe hearing about IO for the first time, or maybe they're taking, maybe a lower level IO course, sort of an introductory IO course. What advice would you have for those students to be successful, even if it's not in IO psychology and they just go out and they work the variety of jobs that students work when they graduate? Knowing what you know about IO, what's some advice you can give to them for those who are wanting to be successful in the workforce?
Definitely. So interestingly enough, prior to my current roles, I used to work in career services. So I worked very closely with undergraduate students trying to find jobs and preparing them for the workforce. 2 things that I would say are critical. One is get a work experience. Unfortunately, you're not going to get a job or a career path straight out of college without any work experience. Having a degree, having a good GPA is icing on the cake for an employer. They want tangible skills that you can bring to the table. So whether that's through volunteer work, internships, work experience, research opportunities, you need to demonstrate that you have the knowledge, skills, and abilities, the KSAOs, that an employer is looking for. So that's critical. I would probably say first and foremost, even above your degree. There are plenty of employers, depending on what you want to pursue, that will take you, even if you haven't completed your degree, for a full-time opportunity, because they value the skill and they do the degree itself. So that's one. 2 is using your classes as a way to highlight your knowledge, skills, and abilities. That's one thing that I always see students have a hard time understanding. You gain or you develop a lot of skills through your coursework, working in projects, different assignments, whether it's improving your written communication, your verbal communication, if you have a presentation. The pandemic, most if not all institutions having to do remote courses, navigating technology, right? If you look at the the NACE, the National Association for Colleges and Employers, they have their career readiness competencies. And these are 8, if I'm not mistaken, there are 8 competencies that they've identified along with employers that are critical for success in the workplace. And you can look at those and then try to see how do they match up with what you've taken, with the courses that you've taken. I oftentimes, and this is a little side note, when I'm talking to faculty members, I urge them to make it very explicit for students. So for example, if you have an assignment, you'll say, hey, well, in this assignment, these are the specific competencies that you're going to be developing, and how you're going to develop those. But more often than not, instructors don't necessarily do that. So it's on the student to really, again, look at what skills you're developing in your courses, so you can show an employer that how well-rounded you are. So yes, you have the knowledge, you have the content, right? But then you have the specific skills that they're looking for, and always match up those skills with, the skills being outlined in the job description. So you want to make sure that your resume, your cover letters are always as relevant as possible to the specific job you're applying for. Usually you don't use the same resume or cover letter for a variety of opportunities you're applying for, because they may have different requirements, different skills that they're looking for. It can make it a little annoying, but if you want to land that opportunity, you want to put your best foot forward, you'll put in the extra work.
Yep. Yeah, I notice and feel the same. And by notice, I mean, I notice that students, one thing that can really help them is looking at a course or course projects or group projects through the lens of what marketable skills am I gaining? So for example, I know sometimes group projects, students can kind of be like, not everyone's going to be, are they going to contribute as much as me? And those sorts of that sort of conflict that can sometimes come up with group projects. But I also try and challenge my students, and I try and, like you say, be really explicit about what they're learning. Is this is a chance to demonstrate inclusive leadership. If you can look at your group project through the lens of, are you someone who is leading with inclusivity? Are you making sure voices are heard in your group? Are you pulling in and listening to people's ideas and giving ideas a fair shot? And right. And we talk about, when we do group project, I try and talk about, here are all the skills that you can practice in this group project that you can then talk about when an interviewer asks you the question, tell me about a group project you've worked on, or tell me about a time you had conflict with a coworker, right?
And they want specific examples.
Yeah, exactly. They want these behaviorally anchored examples. And so if, I'm a firm believer, if we can start giving that language to students earlier, right? Like inclusive leadership and the framework before they do the group project. Because if you tell them after, they can kind of post hoc do it. But if you're telling them that up front, they can view then that lens as this opportunity for growth. And I find that they're more likely to capitalize on that opportunity, as opposed to just another group project where someone's not going to do their fair share. They can at least get some skills, some interpersonal skills out of it.
Definitely.
So, okay, we are so coming up on time here. So is there anything else that you want to share with our audience? Anything about IO that you want to tell them? Any resource, bits of advice, anything left to sort of leave our audience with?
Well, I'll put a little plug for Bridge Builders. We are on Twitter. So the handle is at SIOP, SIOP_BB. So that's for the Bridge Builders committee. We're consistently posting information on IO psychology, whether it's events, videos, different resources, applying to grad school, things that you should know about IO psychology. So it's a great resource. Apart from that, I would encourage students to look at the SIOP website. So it's siop.org. They have a student member section and great resources for students. They have a YouTube channel that has a lot of great videos on different topics in IO psychology or things related to the conferences that we have. And there are great local organizations, and I'm sure there's one in a town near you that can do a little bit things a bit more interactive, or again, you're kind of connecting people with your town who have some similar interests. And then lastly, I would say, I would make the argument that IO psychology is beneficial to everyone. right? Whether you want to pursue psychology or not, whether you want to pursue IO psychology or not. Again, we work for the vast majority of our lives, and having a better understanding of how the workplace operates, things that will make our work better, can only be helpful.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and just echo back that PsyUp website is if you are a student who is curious about IO, I just think that's such a go-to resource for current practitioners as well, but definitely students curious about it. There's so much there for you to learn and explore and see. Clemente, thank you so much for your time today. I really sincerely appreciate it. And I'm really excited about the conversation and sharing it out with students and faculty and anyone else listening. So thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. I appreciate you reaching out to me. This was fun.